in the second part of this chapter is a word which you may have heard before, the patriarchy. Let's just note that this occurs in many different societies around the world in which men have dominant authority. And it's especially pronounced, or it can be reinforced, if you have what we call a patrilineal society. We'll talk more about those in the next class, in which names and inheritance is passed through the male line, and a patrilocal society in which women leave their natal home to go live with the male family. How long have we had patriarchies? Yeah. Since around the time of agriculture. I just want to point this out to you. This is about 12,000 years ago. Evolutionarily speaking, of course, we see different gender roles, but as we just saw in many hunter-gatherer societies, those gender roles are not very fixed. They can be more fluid, and there wasn't a large gender inequality in hunting and gathering societies. Where we see patriarchies emerge is when you have property, things to inherit, agricultural land. So it's not really, patriarchies aren't really a part necessarily of our evolutionary heritage as much as they are of a social organization. They don't emerge until we have agriculture about 12,000 years ago. And when we look at other societies around the world, was everybody a patriarchy? So not only are patriarchies often, or definitely connected to agricultural societies and arose in recent years, in many societies, the norms of patriarchy were introduced by Europeans who wanted to make sure everybody was doing things the way Europeans did things. And so in Native American societies, for example, they wanted to get rid of two-spirit ideas. They wanted to make sure that guys were in charge. This is actually this little representation is from the Māori, but it depicts the father sky god and the mother earth god in a mutual embrace as complementary deities. So for the Māori, there were two complementary and equal deities, and we see this in many different, I'm not saying all indigenous societies are wonderful or perfect, but in the sense of when patriarchies were introduced or reinforced in these societies, it was often because of European control within the last 500 years or so. I also just want to point out that patriarchy doesn't necessarily benefit all the people, all the men in the society. Oftentimes men do benefit in general from patriarchies, but for some men, it can be quite limiting in terms of the way they are able to express themselves, or even the expectations that what they should be doing is providing for a family. And so your book gives you the example of during the 2008 financial crisis, the rates of distress and even suicide among men actually increased because they didn't feel that they were able to live up to these expectations. So in general, yes, it means that men have a dominant authority, and most men like to support these relationships, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're personally benefiting from them. Matriarchies are relatively rare in human societies. And in fact, in the old days, I used to tell you that there were no matriarchies. And there's no such thing as a society in which it's completely parallel to the male-dominated patriarchy. However, there are some examples of some things that look more like what are technically what we would consider matriarchies. The Minangkabau in West Sumatra is a place where the women have a great deal of power. There are a lot of matrilineal societies, so societies in which things are handed down and inheritance proceeds through the matrilineal line. It is not the predominant society, but it is quite common. And so in the case of the Minangkabau and other places that are matriarchies, it is still the case that men have elected political positions. And so that's why there doesn't seem to be a completely female-dominated society that would mirror image a patriarchy. But many societies, and this probably occur again, many of the Native American societies were both matrilineal and had significant power among the women in society, even in terms of things like war councils and military operations. And so while there are not a lot of matriarchies, there are other societies that we might call diarchies, or in places in which men and women share political and economic power. Your textbook talks about how, if we look around the globe, that we see quite a lot of gender disparities or gender inequalities around the world today. And so these arise in a number of different areas. One area in which you see gender-based disparities or inequalities in terms of the health care that people get, things that people will do to their bodies. Now we're talking about what is sometimes referred to as female circumcision, but probably should be known as female genital cutting or mutilation. It's complicated because, yes, it has been in some cases considered a cultural tradition. It has been in some cases advocated for by the women themselves. And so it's something that is actually on the decrease in many different societies because of the people in their own societies talking about this. It's not something we want to encourage, but we want to be careful about blanket condemnations of this. Of course, are they the only societies in which women undergo surgeries that might transform their bodies in a cosmetic way? There's various surgeries and various operations that people have been doing to their bodies for thousands of years and across the world. Do we ever do anything cosmetically to alter our bodies in any way? We do? Oh, what would that be? Yeah, hopefully it's not a never-ending cycle, but it is a cycle. So there's certain standards of beauty or standards of things, and people surgically altering themselves to meet those standards of beauty, which may happen in our own society. I don't know of anybody who would, but yeah, this happens in our own society as well. So we see disparities in health, we see disparities in levels of education. I was just talking about people trying to get more employment and trying to meet gender norms to get certain positions or certain jobs. We see disparities in reproductive rights and how much control people have over their own bodies in different areas of the world. We see, of course, disparities in how much people are willing to acknowledge or recognize or even tolerate people who might be in the category of LGBTQ and more. And we see gender-based violence disparities around the world, in our own society as well as in other societies. So these are complex issues, but it's good to take account of them and figure out how they got to be and where we're going with them. Now, I do want to make clear here, if we look at this story in the long run, that we can see gender roles developing in our evolutionary heritage and in hunting and gathering societies. Of course, they're not always what we might expect. Again, the Neanderthals, we cite evidence of both men and women hunting, and in early human societies, we see that as well. See Viking warriors who are in unexpected places. And so in terms of the more serious gender inequalities and when things got more restrictive in terms of their gender roles, that generally becomes more pronounced in agricultural and industrial societies. So this is the mystery, you might say. Gender roles, yes, are true and our evolutionary heritage. However, why did things get more unequal when it came to agriculture and more restrictive when it came to more modern societies? So again, we didn't have patriarchies forever. Patriarchies came about around the same time of agriculture. Now, that doesn't mean that all agricultural societies are patriarchies. There were different forms of agricultural societies, but we don't have patriarchies until we have agriculture, and that's relatively recent in human society. That's around 12,000 years ago. Then we have European colonialism introducing, or in some cases, intensifying existing ideas around 500 years ago. And then in our own society or in industrial societies is where you see the state and the government starting to regulate people's gender and sexuality. And that's only been true for the last 200 or 300 years, where you actually have government forms and documents and people being put into different educational systems and different occupations based on their gender. So in terms of these very restrictive gender roles, these are pretty recent. They do not date very far back. And so who knows what's going to happen? Your textbook says or asks something at the very end. Don't copy this down. It's just in your text. I'm using their words. They say, what's next for gender asterisk sex? That word that they introduced. They say it is in flux globally, with women gaining more rights and innovations allowing physical transitions. Modern communication, media, social platforms provide avenues to question and redefine gender. What do you think? Is this what's next for gender sex? Is this where we are? It's not 100% there. I'm not going to say what we should be doing, but I will say the direction we're heading, at least in this country, at least right now, is the opposite to this. In fact, I wondered if I would even be able to teach this chapter, this class. In certain states, this chapter would not be allowed to be taught. So you can take a picture of this slide and report me to the federal authorities if you want to. But we're not moving in this direction. This is not the way our current government is moving. Our society might be, I don't know. But certainly in terms of our government, we are moving in the exact opposite direction. So we'll see. I'm still here. They haven't fired me yet, but who knows? Next semester we'll see. I get one more semester of this maybe.